Spencer, earlier in the season, we heard Jimmy Haslam say that basically Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry were safe. I think they're bright. I think they're the right guys. How safe do you think they actually are?
It's interesting you bring this up because I actually was kind of working on a take this morning on 92 through the fan and in relation to just the job security of both those guys. Because you're right, they are linked to each other. They signed the extensions last year that kept them tied to each other for the next 5 years into the future. And as you said, Jimmy Haslam seemed to make it sound like they're going to give them some grace, give them some time to figure this thing out. In the post Deshaun Watson Browns and sort of this rebuild that they're in. So patience kind of seems to be the virtue here. So ultimately, I think like they probably are tied to each other, and they're entering this season with the understanding that like, hey, unless it's a complete disaster, you guys will probably be back in 2026 with a chance to see what you can do with maybe your franchise quarterback in tow, right? But what I think is interesting is this time last year, I would have probably said Kevin Stefanski's seat is a little cooler than Andrew Berry's seat in terms, especially after the playoff run and all that. Because listen, we always tout how many draft picks Andrew Berry's actually hit on. And the only resounding hit is Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, who may never play football again, which isn't his fault. And then he has a couple guys that have, I think panned out at least. Like, I think Greg Newsome's panned out. Granted, he's not going to get to a second contract. The only other guy who's gotten to a second contract is Grant Delpit. So, like, there's a lot of question. There's been a lot of questions. There continues to be a lot of questions about his ability to draft talent and find talent and then draft it for coming out of college and identify those guys. And so I think last year, like, that was kind of at the forefront of our minds of like, how has he supplemented this roster? Has he done good enough? And it was part of the reason why at the end of this past season, people were sort of calling for his job largely, even maybe more so than Stefanski. Now, what I think is interesting is like, I think this class that he just selected has a chance to come away with like three, maybe even four, and if one of the quarterbacks hits, maybe even five, like standout players who are cornerstones for this team moving forward. I think Quinshon Judkins is one. Mason Graham better be one because you took him with the number 5 overall pick. Carson Schlesinger is theoretically your Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah replacement. And then if Harold Fandon becomes like your tight end of the future, like you sort of set yourself up here. And Andrew Berry, I think, can really change his reputation and or start to change his reputation in terms of how he's built this team through the draft. And so that's where to go back to the main subject here, that's where I think the topic of their job security comes into play. Because if the Browns have a bad year and they win like 4 or 5 games, and there's maybe Kevin Stefanski's losing the locker room a little bit, but the players that Andrew Berry drafted this year are standout players. If Quinshon Judkins has like a Pro Bowl season, if Mason Graham is as advertised, and you feel like there's some real foundational pieces now here, all of a sudden I think the pressure sort of shifts more to Stefanski, where it's like, well, is he the right guy for the job to get to use the talent that Andrew Berry's now given him to take this roster to the next level and get it back to a place where they can compete for the playoffs. So I think there is kind of this sense that I feel where the pressure's maybe more so on Kevin Stefanski now. Not that the pressure's off Andrew Berry because these guys still do have to pan out, but I'm kind of operating under the assumption that several of them will, and I think that sort of keeps him in a comfortable spot, even if the team stinks. But with Stefanski, it's like it's going to come down to how much can he squeeze out of a roster that people obviously point out the flaws with. And so I think ultimately they're probably still tied at the hip. They're probably still both back in 2026. But I do think it's an interesting conversation just about where those two sort of stand and what the 2025 season would mean for each of their job status if certain things happen and certain things don't.